Hello, welcome to the program Political Viewpoint on ASO Television. My name is Topsy Gimba, your host. Political Viewpoint comes to you 3 times in a week, where we look into national issues and discuss them in the best way we understand. The program also gives me the opportunity to invite personalities to be with me in the studio to discuss on any edition, on that particular edition. And so this evening, I want to tell you indeed, I have enough information to provide to most people who care to understand. Of course, you know, population is growing rapidly in most African countries, particularly in Nigeria. And scientists are coming up with new methods of how food could be grown to meet up with the growing population. In doing so, they are thinking, not just cultivating like the way we used to do it in the past, but of course introducing methods that can provide more yields for people. But again, scientists are of the opinion, or people who are more concerned about the health of individuals in any given country are saying that what is being profound by scientists over the world concerning genetically modified organisms is considered to be very harmful to human consumption. As a matter of fact, if you take, for instance, today, where cultivation has become so serious in most African countries, particularly developing economy, farmers have developed some chemicals or buying chemicals being produced in various pharmaceutical society and then sell them and use them in killing weeds so that at the end of the day, he goes to the farm, cultivates without having to do much work. But again, people are really asking, to what extent can that be seen to be healthy enough? Because the chemicals you apply on those crops, by the time the rain comes, washes those chemicals, and at the end of the day, the grain you are trying to protect consumes it or utilizes it at the end of the day, and by the time you go there as a human being to harvest, partially you are consuming that. And so they are of the opinion that government should not in any way allow the proponents of this method to go into the national law, so that at the end of the day, Nigeria will suffer or any other person will suffer. And so people have come over time to criticize that particular system. And of course, they are meeting with their friends all over the globe to help propagate this particular theory at the dangers that are there as a result of use of genetically modified organism or crops, so to speak. With me in the studio, I have a renowned person who comes all the way from Zimbabwe to speak to us on this particular matter, not any other person than Rotindo Martin-Yarare. I'm sorry I'm murdering your name, because gradually I'll get to know more about you. It's a pleasure having you on ASO Television, Rotindo.
Thank you so much.
Let me feel you, sir.
And yes, that is the correct pronunciation of my name, too.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. How long have you been in Nigeria?
I've been here for about a week, and I was here to attend the hearing on the public hearing at the House of Representatives on the issue of GMOs and their impact on environment and human health. And I was very moved to see that Nigeria is progressive enough to have this discussion where parliamentarians are interested to find out the impact of these GMOs on human health and the environment. Just the framing of the subject and topic that was being discussed, that they believe that there could be impacts on humanity, impacts on the environment, shows that you have got a human-centric, a life-centric parliament, something that we're missing in many parts of Africa. Because I think you are one of the first countries to actually have a public hearing on the issue of GMOs and to understand or try to understand the impact of these things on human health and the environment. That people-centric aspect is what has kept me here now, because I would have come for the hearing and left. But I was moved, trying to understand who are these public representatives who care about the people so much so that they'll have a hearing. And that hearing is not about, do we have GMOs, should we have GMOs or not? It's about what is the impact on the lives of human beings and the environment. I was being actually very blown away.
Okay.
And we spent some time talking to some of the representatives who want to understand more about these GMOs.
Yeah. So what happened yesterday in the National Assembly of Nigeria? Was it like they accepted the use of GMOs or they kicked against it?
Oh no, it was actually 2 days ago. I was overwhelmed at the number of public representatives that are not interested in having this product. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine, it was a hearing in which the representatives were supposed to pretend to be impartial.
Yeah.
But they couldn't hide the fact that they believe that this thing that is being brought to Nigeria is not good and is not beneficial to Nigerians.
Yeah. So what are those GMOs, as a matter of fact? To anybody who watches you begins to imagine what is GMOs in the first place. What are those crops that can be classified as GMOs?
Right, so GMOs are genetically engineered foodstuffs or seeds. And genetic engineering has got a strict definition that says that any type of genetic alteration or manipulation of a seed, a food crop, or even animal that does not include sexual activity, that is called genetic engineering because it is done in the laboratory. Some other definition says anytime that genes are edited or an animal's genetic material is edited, reduced, or removed by means of laboratory, that is genetic modification. It's unnatural. And the reason it's unnatural is that the intention is to break the species barrier, the barrier put by nature, put by God, to try and prevent the mixing of species that are not related. That is broken in the science lab by either gene editing or what they call a gene gun that is going to shoot the genes of an external species that is unrelated to the species that they want to alter, and that is genetic modification.
Okay. If that happens, is it not intended to meet up with the growing population? And to what extent can that be said to be harmful? Again, looking at the way the Africa particularly, these are developing countries we have, and the economy as well is poor. But again, the population keep increasing. And to meet up with this growing population, there is a need to come up with some methods. And I think GMO considered to be the best. To what extent can I say is not correct?
Well, that is not correct because in America itself, where these genetically engineered foods are coming from, 30 million people are hungry and living in poverty. They are food insufficient. In South Africa, 53% of the people in South Africa are food insufficient. They go sometimes without eating a meal in a day. And yet South Africa is the biggest producer of GMOs on the continent. And what has happened is that the world currently produces food for over 14 billion people, where we've got a population of 8 billion people. But the problem is most of that food is thrown away because the producers of this food, fear that if this food goes onto the market, it will actually reduce the market prices. So they throw away the food to try and keep supply low and to actually increase the prices of that food. So this shows that we've got no shortage of food. We've got an issue of distribution. Less than 65%, more than 65% of Africa's arable land is not being used. So we're not even using our land adequately to feed our people. Moreover, 65% of the food that is produced in the world, that feeds the world, actually comes from small-scale farmers who do not use genetically engineered foods. Because in the world, there's less than 20% of the countries use genetically modified seeds to feed their people. India does not have genetically modified foods to feed its people, neither does China. Those are the biggest populations. If they can feed their people without GMOs, why do we have this narrative that we in Africa with smaller populations need GMOs to feed our own people? Mm-hmm. And why are the Western countries that have these GMOs, like America, unable to feed all their citizens?
But do they use GMOs?
They use GMOs in America. They use GMOs in South America, Brazil, Argentina. They use GMOs in South Africa. And these are the few countries that are using these GMOs. And we need to also alert people that there's an organization that belongs to Bill Melinda Gates plus the Rockefeller Foundation that has been brought onto the African continent in 2012. Their agenda was to try and help South Africa to become more productive. The organization is called AGRA. It was started by Kofi Annan, who was the former Secretary General of the UN. And he was used to try and influence African leaders to adopt these GMOs. Then after him came Strive Masiwa, and now there is Agnes Kalibat. The issue about this organization is it's trying to say it wants to bring technologies to help Africans produce more. But it's in its annual report of 10 years in 2022, it admitted that it had actually brought food insufficiency or reduced self-sufficiency by 30%. ever since it started 10 years ago. And countries like Rwanda, countries like Uganda, and a number of other African countries that had adopted the methods and strategies of AGRA have actually become less food sufficient. Why? Because the original seeds that rural farmers have used for generations, thousands of years, passing it down from their ancestors through to them, those have been destroyed and been replaced by patented seeds that are hybrids and now GMOs that cannot reproduce. Farmers have to go and buy seeds every season. The seeds require fertilizers, they require pesticides because they are not adapted to the climate or environment, they're not heirloom seeds. And as such, this is now costing farmers to produce, and those farmers in the rural areas who sometimes live on less than $1 a day because they don't depend on money, they depend on their ability to produce for themselves, build their houses with their hands, are now left with a situation where they can't afford seeds that usually cost in excess of $20 for just a packet of 5 kgs or so.
Okay. I'm just seeking your opinion, Mr. Rotendo. To what extent can you say there's a political undertone with this new method of farming where chemicals are being introduced to what we're supposed to consume, and then at the end of the day you notice that people are really dying despite the fact that we are producing to meet up with the growing population? Is there any political undertone for those who are proponents of that particular system of farming or producing crops?
It's a double-edged sword where there is policy on one hand, but you've also got an issue where there was academic influence upon those people that are scientists in Africa. They were sent through to universities in the United States and they were taught agro-business. The agro-business that they were taught was a penetration strategy by the Americans to get these PhD graduates, these master's degree graduates, to bring American styles of farming and American products into the African continent. A lot of those people were then placed into government departments. So these people began to make policy based on an American strategy, an American product that is highly dependent on mechanization, on seeds that are engineered or patented, and also on chemicals that the Americans make and wanted to sell. This was what the greening revolution that was created by the Rockefeller Foundation that feeds into this institution called AGRA was tailored to do on the African continent. The politicians are now being roped in to make the policy because they didn't have enough politicians trained in America to make policy. They only designed these people that they made to be put into agricultural departments. So now what they do is they've got lobby groups, people who come to Africa, pay decision makers and politicians to make the political decisions and policies and laws that are then going to make these GMOs ubiquitous to our agricultural process. However, there's a kickback, especially from Nigeria. You've got these Nigerian professors who were not educated in these indoctrinating systems that are questioning the science, that are going into the labs, that are doing the research, and they're coming back and saying, no, this is not good for Africa. This is not what is going to give us food sufficiency. This is actually going to destroy our food sufficiency. That is what you've got unique to Nigeria. Experts and specialists and educated people with a questioning and inquisitive mind that is actually going against the popular academic narrative being manufactured in America and proliferated into African universities.
Okay. Take a look at this the current situation most people are going through in Africa, particularly in Nigeria, where diseases that have been known to be for the elderly, the minors are already getting affected as a result of that. For instance, liver cirrhosis, kidney failures and all that. You will not discover a child at the age of 10 is already affected as a result of that. Can that be attributed to what we consume as a result of the GMOs, or just another dimension of lifespan that is beginning to affect some of us in Africa like the way we are today in Nigeria?
That is a brilliant question. And this is where the science of statistics, the correlation coefficient, comes into the equation. When you do correlation coefficient, you look at when GMOs, hybrids with chemicals, and it's not only the chemicals that are associated with GMOs that have become a problem, but it is also chemicals that are linked and associated with hybrids, and these start with the compound Ds and the compounds of the fertilizers. All of these, when they started being used, we started seeing an increase of certain diseases that never existed before. And so that correlation of the utilization of these chemicals, these hybrids, and the proliferation of these diseases makes a clear correlation coefficient. And that correlation coefficient results in causality. And that is what the new era of doctors, professors in Nigeria and other parts of Africa are beginning to point to. That when we create graphs, we're seeing graphs that correlate with the introduction of chemicals, introduction of commercial farming, introduction of these technologies in agriculture with diseases and sickness. And you know, there's another chemical that many people do not understand. It's called neonicotinoids. If you've ever seen your seeds, they are coated with a green color, a red color, even before you plant. That particular chemical seeps into the plant and then becomes part and parcel of the toxins that live in the plant and then affect what feeds on those plants. But they have been known to be non-selective. So they affect the bees, they affect the butterflies, they affect pollinators. And these were not even found in GMOs, they were found in hybrids. And they've now been put into the GMOs. So the biotech companies are trying to sell this chemical that coats your seed, saying that your seed will not be eaten by worms. That's nonsense. And that then goes into the plant, poisons your pollinators, and that's why you're seeing a collapse of insects, pollinators, and these very beneficial insects that used to eat some of the pests that bother our crops. So this armyworm people talk about, that armyworm is proliferating because within its cycle there used to be aphids that used to feed on it, there used to be creatures that used to feed on it that have been eliminated by neonicotinoids, eliminated by glyphosate, eliminated by the chemicals that we're spraying as pesticides. And so we've killed the natural pests to the armyworm, hence the armyworm has become a crisis in Africa.
So if you look at it, Rotendo, who benefits at the end of it all? For instance, if this particular new introductory method into cropping has not been pointed out, the dangers of that has not been pointed out, and then we embrace it like the way some other African countries are, and then we continue to eat and produce that, who benefits at the end of the day? Is it ourselves that we have the growing population, or those who are sending those chemicals for us to use are benefiting? And what becomes of the world after a very long period of time?
The benefit structure or the chain of benefit is very simple. It is the biotech companies that benefit from selling their chemicals, selling their seeds, and then the more we destroy our soils, the more we kill the parasites that feed on some of the pests that then become a pestilence to our crops, the more chemicals they sell.
Yeah.
The more we destroy our soils, the more chemicals they sell. So they make higher profits. But once we get sick, there is another complex of industries that is the pharmaceutical or big pharma, which is the biggest industry in America. It is a 5 trillion US dollar industry that sells medicine. In America, they're already selling to 52% of the American population chronic medications. So 52% of the American population is on chronic medication. Now, when you listen to that figure, you need to understand in that 52% are children. In that 52% are teenagers. In that 52% are young adults. Imagine a nation of people where 52% of your people are on chronic medication. And remember, there is a great population of that 30 million people in America who I told you live in poverty, who can't afford the chronic medication. Otherwise, that chronic medication probably be 60% of their population. So America becomes the blueprint we need to look at. If you look at a sick nation like America, and they're eating this technology, do you want to be like America? Does Nigeria want to be like America to survive on these pills? Yet you don't have the money that America has from robbing and stealing other countries through creating these diseases, creating this unhealthy crisis, then simply looking like they're providing a solution of medications that don't heal. We call it the Hegelian dialectic. Can we afford that in Africa? I say no. Our governments cannot afford it. In Zimbabwe, where I come from, we've got the highest cancer death rate right now. Zimbabwe was under economic sanctions for 23 years. Our cancer machines could not be repaired because of the embargoes against companies that would want to give us parts and services for those machines. So it became a double whammy. And so today, Zimbabweans are dying out of cancer more than any other country. It is a crisis we have created by allowing toxic food that has glyphosate that then causes these cancers, because glyphosate is known as a cancer-causing chemical.
Yeah. So, can you name some of these countries that we have in the African continent that are already involved in that? Do you have African countries aside from Nigeria?
Right. South Africa was the first to adopt GMOs on the African continent. Kenya just recently adopted GMOs. But the problem is that you don't just have a crisis where Kenya and South Africa have adopted GMOs. They have neighbors. And what the Europeans have done is when they were about to give us independence, they made sure that certain African countries will become anchors of the new imperialism or neo-colonialism. Okay. South Africa was one of the leading countries where they still have the biggest European population on the continent, and that European population is supposed to continue driving imperialism, which includes the proliferation of diseases, the proliferation of GMOs, the proliferation of a financial system that cannot allow Africans to trade. That is why South African banks will follow the Financial Action Task Force regulations and rules to try and stop the movement of free money across the African continent. And they are also the anchor for bringing these GMOs. So what happens is, while South Africa is playing that role, they cripple the other countries by unfair competition from South Africa and Kenya. Those companies go into other African countries, destroy their industry, making them dependent on these two countries. They put sanctions on countries like they did on Zimbabwe to destroy its agricultural industry. They deprive you tractors, they deprive you fertilizers, they deprive you of everything you need except those toxic seeds. Then when your farmers can't farm, you import from South Africa, you import from Kenya, and that's how they get the GMOs into your country. Another strategy they use is that you might refuse GMOs in your country, but South Africa has them. So they will send smugglers to come from South Africa with these seeds into your country. Those smugglers sell it to farmers, promising those farmers a higher yield. Those farmers grow the crop, it cross-pollinates. The pollen drifts onto the seed or the national seed. That national seed stock then eventually gets contaminated, and then the genetic use restriction technology within the GMO or the NOS terminator gene is then put into your crops. But there's another strategy ahead from the professors in Nigeria. Some of the traits of the GMO that are killing the ability to reproduce are recessive. So you don't see them, you don't pick them up within the experiments, only for your crop to then get this recessive gene that begins to translate itself over time, and it
destroys our own.
It destroys your natural seed stock.
Wow.
So what they do, like what they're doing in South Africa, is the strategy they used in the first country to adopt GMOs was Argentina. They used Argentina to contaminate the seeds of other countries in South America. Now, once the contamination has happened in the region, the owner of the GMOs will then go to the country that approved the GMOs and says, I want a license fee for my technology. Then your government says, no, we will not give you any license fee. So they rush to the market that buys it in Europe. In the Africa Continental Free Trade, if we're not careful, if they control that free trade, they will then tell the countries that buy grain, if you see any grain with our genetic material, you must tax 2% technology use fee. That's what they did in South America.
Wow.
So those countries like Brazil, those countries that did not accept GMOs, once they took their products, their soya beans, their maize to market in Europe, all of a sudden GMOs were found in there and they were charged 2%.
Wow. Can you imagine?
It's a witchcraft strategy.
Honestly,
it's a witchcraft strategy.
Indeed.
And that's what they've done. Indeed. And we are saying to Nigeria, it's all good that you might think that you want to increase fruit production. You probably won't. You will contaminate your natural seed stock. You will have a seed stock that is unreproductive. But more importantly, when you go to market, your profits are going to be creamed by somebody who's going to claim that you've got their technology in your produce. And that person is going to take your profits, because sometimes your margin is that 2%. It's now going to go to Monsanto, your farmer is left without anything, and you become slaves of a system that cannot reward you, but you have to continue to buy the seed and pay royalties.
Can you imagine? Is there any punishment associated with that if a country refuses to go by this GMO policy they're trying to introduce? For instance, if Nigeria decides not to, is there any other country at all, super country, will not say, no, because you are refusing, this is the way you're going to be punished?
Right. So what usually happens is African countries are lazy to use international law, yet the Westerners are not lazy to use international law to their advantage. Yet both laws can be used to the advantage of both. So what will happen is when Nigeria refuses this technology, they'll be reminded of some of the treaties that they have signed. They'll be reminded of the Arusha Accords or agreements. They'll be reminded that they signed the World Trade Organization, GATT. All these will then be used to force them to open their markets. And we've also done structural adjustment programs. We want to borrow from the West. We sign up to the structural adjustment programs. Those structural adjustment programs and what we call the bilateral investment promotion protection acts, protection agreements that we sign, then get us into a position where we're forced to acquiesce to these kind of agreements and the inbringing of these technologies. We need to learn to untie ourselves from these guts. We need to untie ourselves from agreements that force us to open our markets without questioning whether it's of benefit to us. Because when the Americans want to benefit their market, they do not fear to abrogate GATT regulations to sanction China. They abrogate GATT regulations to sanction Zimbabwe, to make sure that the products of those countries can come into their country. But we don't. We should. And we must also make laws to punish these companies that are bringing these toxic, inimical, and economic destroying products into our countries. Because in my country, for instance, we have a Plant Protection Act. That Plant Protection Act says anything that is hazardous or injurious should not be allowed to come into the country. So our phytosanitary regulations already say anything injurious to a plant, and GMOs are injurious if they kill the ability of a plant to reproduce. Let's use that law to arrest those who bring in these GMOs. Let's use that law to protect our environment. But we are lazy. We don't do that. And so this is what we need to do. So we are actually going to be taking, in Zimbabwe, going to be taking one of the companies that's been smuggling GMOs into Zimbabwe for a class action suit for causing cancer in the country. I think that we need to make it fashionable for Africans to go to court against international companies that harm our environment, harm our economy, and harm our ability to produce in these national security threats that we are talking about here.
Wow. Listening to the analysis you are really making, one begins to imagine, that probably you people, step into this particular danger most African countries have begun to find themselves in by coming up to say what you are saying for the public to become aware and then fight against. Can that be said? Is that too late or you are on point?
It's not too late. It's never too late. As long as we still have seeds that can reproduce and we can protect those seeds,
our own,
and encourage our farmers to use those and to start questioning not just the GMOs but even the hybrids so that we go back to our traditional seeds. Once your decision makers, your lawmakers, government officials, the people in the administration, agricultural administration departments, the same people that were indoctrinated with the false miseducation by Harvard and Western universities, if we can reverse that, get them to start experimenting, to start re-looking at what it is that I'm saying. So for example, I'll give you an example. When Kenya was introducing the GMOs into Kenya, they told us that they did not have the terminator gene or the genetic use restriction technology in the crops that were going to be brought to Kenya because they said the Americans did not commercialize that genetic function. It was not true because in Zimbabwe we took samples of GMOs in Zimbabwe, took them to the lab, and we found the NOS terminator inside. Right? And we also saw the promoter of that particular GMO in there. We were able to prove scientifically that it is a lie. And so what we're getting to do is we are provoking scientists, professors, to start doing the experiments. We're provoking them to re-look at the education they were given and to reassess it if it was true. We're asking them to look at the yields over 5 years. If I put a GMO in this land and I recrop it with GMOs, does the land produce more or does it produce less? and compare that with an organic crop. Does the land become more fertile or less fertile? And take that, all those costs, factor them in, and determine what is the productive coefficient for us to determine whether GMOs are more productive or not. And most likely than not, you will discover that the GMOs produce less. Hence, Australia is the leader in organic farming today, because they recognized that the hybrids and the GMOs are less productive, and they've gone into a niche of becoming organic producers, because they realize that if they continue to do that, they will feed the world while the rest of the world is dying of hunger, because their land will be dead and their seeds will be unproductive. And so Australia will take leadership. I call that vision.
Okay, I really appreciate your effort, and I believe you sustain that. Your visit to Nigeria speaks a lot, and I believe you are in collaboration with some other persons who are equally fighting the cause to ensure that we stay safe. Do you know some other non-governmental organizations who are more keen and interested to ensure that this particular technology is not introduced into Nigeria, for instance? Do you have some of them?
Oh yes, absolutely. We've got institutions like CEFSA that is doing a very fantastic job fighting GMOs in this country. There are others that I know, but I do not have my paper to actually read them out.
Yeah.
But there were about 94 different NGOs and civil society organizations that were at the hearing that were posturing and positioning themselves against this GMO issue. And I thought it was very encouraging. Probably Nigeria has got the most, because in my own country we've probably got a few. And I think it's very important that Africans get to understand this issue and more come on board to fight this GMO crisis.
Okay. Where can they be assisted? These like CEFSA and other ones that, in case, to ensure that proper education is provided for farmers in Nigeria and ourselves that are likely to be victims tomorrow.
The good thing I like about your government is that I'm sitting on a government station now, and I'm free to speak. Where I come from, my government station will not give you this opportunity because they have partnered with the GMOs. In South Africa, they won't give you this platform. So for me, it's encouraging to see that the Nigerian government is not muzzling the conversation. If they are not muzzling the conversation, if they are giving platforms like this, the education alone is the assistance that they give, number one. Number two, as these organizations like CEFSA continue to create awareness, you will see business people who understand exact danger and the negative legacy that is going to be left by these GMOs starting to come up to say, let us partner you. Government itself in Nigeria, I think, is very capable to continue to give space like this, but more importantly, to start giving assistance to those organizations that are doing that. And if we continue this fight, there are NGOs, government organizations, and non-governmental organizations on this continent that will start to finance and support and partner those that have taken first mover position in fighting these GMOs. Okay. So I think eventually we're going to get there. But remember, to fight a conscientization war doesn't require much resources. It requires education. It requires platforms that reach the people. And in time, people will then join and partner in such efforts.
Like you had the opportunity to be at the assembly, that is the National Assembly in Nigeria yesterday, where the House of Representatives, lawmakers took the debate on that. Having listened or watched the way they debated on that very particular subject matter, will you say it's going to actually become a law that let us have law supporting GMOs in this country, or not to support? In what you watched yesterday or you listened to? From the analysis.
The truth of the matter is there was overwhelming support for the banning of GMOs by the members of Congress, by the experts that came, by the professors, by the civil society organizations. In fact, it was the government agencies and a few individuals in those agencies that actually seemed to be actually supporting the GMOs. And unfortunately for them, they actually sounded compromised. They sounded like they were trying to defend the indefensible.
Wow.
We even had one gentleman there saying that, yes, maybe the GMOs kill, but why don't you eat and die?
Wow.
I thought
imagine that?
Imagine that. I was shocked to hear that, but I thought it was a level of desperation to promote the undefensible. And the question starts to come to your mind, why would a grown man, an intellectual, I'm sure he's even got a PhD, because Nigeria has got very educated people in its government. Why would an educated man take such an untenable, illogical position? So I think if we continue the education, it's going to become embarrassing to stand for anything that is likely to destroy Nigeria's food security, safety, human health, and human life. It's going to be indefensible. And what I want to say is that Nigeria has to continue this thing of taking leadership as Africa's giant. You're the most relevant country in African terms. An African-owned economy, an African-governed economy. We cannot continue to have South Africa controlled by white people, telling Africa what to do when Nigeria exists. The eagle has got to rise, the eagle has got to take its position, and that pride that I've seen in your parliament of understanding that you are the father of this continent, you need to continue to father this continent and stop this GMO crisis that has become a problem in Africa.
Wow, Rotendo. Now look at it this way. Now that you have gotten the parliament really supporting your view rather than going by the way they had earlier intended, where do we go from here to ensure we concretize this particular decision so far they have taken, so that at the end of the day, in a very long run, that particular initiative dies off immediately and allow us to live the way we used to live in the past?
You know, the thing is with these engagements that have happened, it's not just about engaging. What we've learned from some of the civil society organizations is they're going out and lobbying. And the lobbying is not happening with the civil society organizations that don't want GMOs, but even the pro-GMOs are also lobbying.
Yeah.
And one strategy that they're utilizing is educating the parliamentarians who do not understand this issue. I was shocked to hear some of these parliamentarians, after being given this information by some of these civil society leaders, saying to themselves, we cannot leave a legacy of death and destruction to our children. Because if this had been done by our forefathers, there would be no Nigeria today. So I had men and women who are sitting in your House of Representatives who are saying, we intend to leave a legacy and a Nigeria for our children. That blew my mind. So you've got men and women who've got hearts and minds that are interested in this country, and all it takes is for the educators, the activists, to educate them on how this particular technology could destroy the legacy of Nigeria. And I'm sure they will make the right decisions. There's always going to be those who are going to be tempted with money, but the people we spoke to today say, yes, we've been tempted by money, but we want to leave a legacy. We want our children to eat tomorrow. We want them to exist tomorrow. We want to do what our elders did for us. They left us a Nigeria.
Wow. We are gradually coming to the end of the program, but however, before we run off, Rotendo Martin Yarari, is there anything possibly you ought to have said or you forgot to say that will further educate Nigerians? Because we might not have the opportunity to meeting with you again like the way the opportunity came and we are interviewing you. So at what point do you think you have something to say that you need to say so that we get to know better? Because this program, we might be airing it has become a national anthem for Nigeria. I'll be repeating it often than not on radio, on television, so to speak, so that people who have been watching will get to know basically the dangers that are there in this GMO of a thing that we're discussing.
You know, the irony is that I came to Nigeria to talk about these issues. I ended up learning and being taught by Nigerians. The spirit, the heart of the Nigerians. So we talk about the people that are civil society organizations, the activists against GMOs. They've taught me a lot. The parliamentarians, they've taught me that love of nation, patriotism comes first, and the interest of Nigeria comes first. And they've demystified these lies and propaganda that have been told about the Nigerian people, that they are corrupt, self-centered. I've never seen a more united people. The fact that you are leading this struggle through your parliament illustrates just how separated you are from the rest of Africa that has not had this discussion, yet these GMOs have been approved in some countries for over 15 years. So I want to say to Nigerians, I have seen your love. I have seen your love for country, your love for life, and your God-fearingness. Do not stop. Continue to have that leading you. They've lied to us in the world that you guys prefer yourselves, you're self-centered about your own interests. It's a lie. And I want you to continue this message of serving your people, serving the nation, denouncing and refusing to take bribes. in order for the love of your country. Where I come from, people take bribes before they think about the nation. People take bribes and are willing to have their countries destroyed, hoping that they'll go and live overseas. Here I've seen professors who don't care about a passport or a visa to some country outside because they intend to live, work, and die in Nigeria. That is something encouraging, and I want to say, keep up that spirit. Keep up the spirit that I've seen with a team of experts who could live anywhere in the world, including the most difficult countries to live in, because they're qualified. But they've chosen to stay here to fight for Nigeria because this is where they see their life, future, and their legacy.
Thank you so very much. Let me feel you again, sir.
Thank you, sir.
I'm so delighted having this opportunity to interview you.
Thank you for the opportunity, and I'm humbled by your people and how it is that you are looking after this legacy called Nigeria.
I appreciate it.
Take your leadership as a nation. Be the head of this continent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's how far we can go on this program, Political Viewpoint on ASO Television. I've been speaking with Rotendo Martinyarare. He is from Zimbabwe. He explained to us basically the dangers that are inherent in GMOs. And I'm so informed on the implications should we as a country decide to do what we ought not to do. And so with this interview we have had with him, we are going to be propagating it often than not so that Nigerians become conscious of the problems that are likely to come, assuming we decide to go the other way. I thank you so much for being with us, watching us on ASO Television. We shall be doing that some other time, maybe some other day, like the way we've just done it. My name again remains as Top C Gamer. See you and bye-bye.